June 15th, 1944. A quiet intelligence bunker beneath the bombed-out ruins of Caen, France. Major Wilhelm Steiner of the Wehrmacht Intelligence Corps stared at the captured American battle plans with growing disbelief, his face ashen under the dim yellow light. Across from him, Captain Klaus Herrmann, head of Airborne Defense Assessment, repeatedly checked his calculations, desperate to find an error that would make the numbers less terrifying. Between them lay not weapons or battle plans, but something far more devastating to German strategic thinking. A simple American requisition form for parachutes, thousands upon thousands of nylon parachutes. In that moment, both men realized they were witnessing the impossible. America wasn't just planning to drop men behind German lines, they were preparing to drop entire armies from the sky. The document appeared unremarkable at first glance. Standard military requisition forms captured from an American supply officer during a skirmish near the Normandy coast. Columns of numbers, production schedules, material specifications, nothing that seemed worthy of immediate alarm. Yet the figures they contained represented an airborne capability so vast that both officers had spent the previous 3 days verifying sources, recalculating numbers, and searching desperately for errors that would make the reality less catastrophic. Herrmann pushed the document across the wooden table, his hand trembling slightly. "This cannot be accurate," he said quietly, though his tone carried no conviction. He was not stating a belief, but expressing a wish, the desperate hope that reality might somehow be less overwhelming than the evidence suggested. Major Steiner pulled another sheet from the stack. "I thought the same, but look at this manufacturing specifications for their T5 parachutes. They're producing them entirely from nylon. Not silk, not cotton, not canvas. Nylon. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And, if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you." The significance wasn't lost on Herrmann. Germany couldn't produce parachutes in such quantities because silk was virtually unobtainable due to the Allied blockade. The Reich had experimented with synthetic alternatives, but nothing matched silk's strength-to-weight ratio. Canvas parachutes were too heavy, too bulky, too unreliable. German paratrooper operations had been limited by parachute availability since the war's beginning. But nylon, this American invention, changed everything. A synthetic fiber stronger than silk, lighter than cotton, impervious to mildew, and most devastatingly, manufacturable in unlimited quantities from basic industrial chemicals. The Americans are producing 30,000 nylon parachutes per month at this single factory in Virginia, Steiner continued, pointing to a production schedule. "That's more than we've manufactured for our entire paratroop divisions since 1939. Herrmann studied the figures in silence. The Americans were equipping entire divisions, not companies or battalions, but divisions with parachutes. This wasn't a limited operation like Crete or Market Garden. This was airborne warfare on a scale that German military doctrine hadn't even conceptualized. "How can they produce so many?" Herrmann asked, knowing the answer but needing to hear it spoken aloud. "DuPont Chemicals. They've converted their entire nylon stockings production to military use. What was once used for women's hosiery is now dropping soldiers behind our lines." Steiner gestured to another document. "These are materials requisitions. They're producing the nylon from coal, water, and air basic elements we have in abundance. But they've industrialized the process on a scale we cannot match." The two men had spent the past week engaged in exactly this kind of comparison, cross-referencing captured American documents with German capabilities, prisoner interrogations with aerial reconnaissance, reports from agents in neutral countries with analysis of recovered equipment. Every source confirmed the same impossible truth. America wasn't just outproducing Germany in parachutes. They were operating on a scale that made German airborne capabilities look primitive by comparison. The journey to this moment of terrible clarity had begun months earlier, but its roots stretched back years into fundamental miscalculations about American industrial potential and innovative capability. The German intelligence services had tracked Allied airborne developments since before the war, compiling reports on training facilities, aircraft modifications, and parachute design. but they had consistently, catastrophically underestimated what America could achieve when fully mobilized. This wasn't mere incompetence. The assumptions built into German strategic thinking, shaped by their own industrial experience, made American production capabilities seem impossible, even fantastical. Germany's own wartime experience colored everything they believed about airborne operations. By 1944, the Reich had mobilized every available resource, stripped occupied territories of raw materials, implemented forced labor on a massive scale, and pushed its industrial capacity to what seemed like absolute limits. German factories operated around the clock, workers put in extended shifts. Production of weapons and equipment had increased dramatically from pre-war levels. Germany was producing aircraft, tanks, and artillery at rates that would have seemed unthinkable in 1939. Yet, despite this total mobilization, despite conquering most of Europe and exploiting its resources, despite the desperate intensification of production under Albert Speer's direction, Germany was losing the material war. The fundamental German miscalculation began before the first shot was fired. In 1940, General Hap Arnold of the U.S. Army Air Forces had announced that America would train 50,000 paratroopers annually. Over the following months, he expanded this vision 5 airborne divisions, each with 17,000 men, all fully equipped with modern parachutes, gliders, special weapons, and custom equipment. The entire force would be deployable anywhere in the world within months. These figures were transmitted to Berlin through multiple intelligence channels. When presented to Hitler and his advisors, the German leadership's response was dismissive, even contemptuous. The numbers were obviously American propaganda, they concluded, designed to intimidate Germany and boost Allied morale. The assessment seemed entirely reasonable based on available data. In 1939, American airborne forces were practically non-existent. The entire U.S. paratrooper contingent consisted of a test platoon of 48 men. American parachute designs were obsolete, limited in number, and relied on imported silk. The U.S. Army's sole airborne transport group possessed just a handful of unarmed, unmodified civilian aircraft. How could a nation with such limited airborne capability suddenly create multiple divisions of fully equipped paratroopers? It violated every principle of military development that German experience had established. Building the necessary infrastructure took years. Training specialized jumpmasters required months. Developing effective deployment techniques demanded extensive trial and error. Field Marshal Hermann Göring, head of the Luftwaffe and creator of Germany's own paratroop divisions, reportedly laughed when he heard Arnold's announcement. "The Americans can make refrigerators and automobiles," he allegedly stated to his staff. "But they cannot create an airborne army overnight. Their businessmen know nothing of military requirements, and their soldiers know nothing of industrial capabilities." Whether the exact quote is accurate, the sentiment it captured was certainly real. German leadership genuinely believed American industrial capacity was unsuited for specialized military production. This assessment seemed supported by observable facts. America excelled at mass-producing consumer goods, automobiles, radios, household appliances, but military equipment, especially something as specialized as airborne forces, required different expertise, different organizational structures, different engineering approaches. German airborne forces had been training since 1935. How could American department stores and automobile manufacturers possibly match years of specialized military development? The Germans failed to understand something fundamental about American industrial potential that would prove decisive. The Great Depression had idled massive industrial infrastructure across the United States. Factories sat empty or underutilized. Millions of skilled workers remained unemployed or underemployed. Chemical plants that once produced consumer goods operated at reduced capacity. What looked like economic weakness was actually enormous reserve industrial capacity waiting to be activated. When Roosevelt called for military mobilization, he wasn't asking American industry to build entirely new capabilities from nothing. He was asking them to convert existing factories, rehire laid-off workers, and redirect machinery that was already built, installed, and proven. The infrastructure for industrial mobilization already existed, requiring only redirection rather than creation. DuPont had developed nylon in 1935 as a replacement for silk stockings. By 1940, the company had invested millions in nylon production facilities to meet civilian demand. When Pearl Harbor brought America into the war, DuPont simply redirected this production capacity from stockings to parachutes. The chemical processes, the machinery, the expertise all remained the same, only the end product changed. Germany, by contrast, had no such reserve. By 1944, German industry was already operating at near capacity. The Nazi regime had been rearming since 1933, steadily expanding military production year after year. There was little idle capacity to activate, few unemployed skilled workers to rehire, minimal machinery sitting unused. German expansion could only come through building new factories from scratch, conquering territories with existing industrial capacity, or exploiting slave labor. Each approach took years to implement and faced inherent limitations. The fundamental difference in starting positions, American unused capacity versus German full utilization, meant that America could scale up production far faster than Germany could comprehend. Captain Herrmann came from Prussia's military tradition. His family had served Germany for generations. He embodied the professional German officer class, methodical, detail-oriented, committed to objective analysis. His organization collected information from multiple sources, including Luftwaffe reconnaissance flights, radio intercepts, agent networks operating in neutral countries, systematic interrogation of captured paratroopers, and equipment captured during combat operations. Throughout 1942 and 1943, as America entered the war and began mobilizing, the intelligence picture reaching Caen remained incomplete and confusing. Reports of American airborne capability varied wildly depending on source and method. Some indicated massive training programs, with thousands of men jumping daily from hundreds of transport aircraft. Others suggested continued equipment shortages, training accidents, and inefficient deployment methods. The German High Command chose to believe the more comforting assessments, the ones that aligned with their preconceptions about American weakness. This selective acceptance of intelligence wasn't unique to Germans. All military organizations tend to favor information confirming existing beliefs over data, challenging core assumptions. But in Germany's case, the cost of this cognitive bias would prove catastrophic. After all, Germany was winning in 1941 and early 1942. The Wehrmacht had conquered Poland in weeks, France in 6 weeks, Yugoslavia in 11 days. German forces occupied Norway, Denmark, the Netherlands, Belgium, most of France, significant portions of the Soviet Union. The Luftwaffe had proven itself the most formidable air force in the world. German tanks and tactical methods were clearly superior to those of any opponent. U-boats were sinking Allied shipping faster than it could be replaced, or so Berlin believed. Why should German leadership fear a nation that had not fought a major war since 1918, whose army was tiny, whose paratroopers were inexperienced, whose industrial capacity was oriented toward consumer goods rather than military hardware? This comfortable certainty began developing cracks in Sicily when American paratroopers landed during Operation Husky on July 9, 1943. German commanders expected to face inexperienced troops with inferior equipment who could be quickly defeated and pushed back into the sea. What they encountered was something else entirely. The Americans were indeed inexperienced. That assessment proved accurate. The airborne drops were scattered, with units landing miles from their intended drop zones. Many paratroopers drowned in the Mediterranean or were killed by friendly fire. German forces successfully repelled several disorganized attacks, but something about the American airborne forces troubled experienced German commanders. The sheer quantity of their equipment was staggering and unprecedented. American units that suffered heavy losses in battle were fully re-equipped within days, sometimes within hours. Parachutes, weapons, ammunition, specialized equipment flowed in seemingly endless streams. German units that won tactical victories found themselves unable to exploit them because American logistics simply absorbed the losses and continued operations without pause. Captured American supply caches contained more parachutes and airborne equipment than entire German paratroop regiments possessed. American transport aircraft appeared in numbers that German forces could only dream of mustering. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, commanding German forces in the Mediterranean from March 1942, began sending increasingly alarmed reports to Berlin. Each American airborne company, he noted, possessed more parachutes than an entire German Fallschirmjäger battalion. American airborne logistics operated aircraft fleets larger than those available to entire German armies. Preparation facilities captured during German counterattacks contained parachutes, jump equipment, specialized weapons, medical supplies, and airborne-specific gear in quantities that seemed wasteful, even obscene by German standards. Kesselring, known for his tactical brilliance, understood that tactics became irrelevant when facing such massive material superiority. He urged reassessment of Allied airborne capabilities, arguing that American industrial capacity combined with innovative deployment methods made traditional anti-paratrooper defenses inadequate, regardless of German tactical success. These reports were noted, filed, and largely ignored by the High Command in Berlin. Kesselring was known for pessimism, for always requesting more resources, for emphasizing difficulties over opportunities. His warnings were dismissed as the usual general's grumbling, the predictable tendency of field commanders to exaggerate enemy strength and minimize their own capabilities. Hitler personally rejected Kesselring's assessments, insisting that willpower and tactical superiority would overcome numerical disadvantages. The Führer's worldview could not accommodate the possibility that industrial production might matter more than ideological commitment or military skill. But the intelligence analysts could not so easily dismiss what they were seeing. Throughout 1943, as the war turned decisively against Germany on multiple fronts, the volume of concerning data increased exponentially. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. After the Sicily campaign, German intelligence conducted systematic interrogation of captured American paratroopers. The debriefing teams, operating from questionnaires developed by Captain Herrmann's intelligence service, sought to understand not just tactical details of the fighting, but broader patterns of American airborne capability. The stories these prisoners told were remarkably consistent across rank, unit, and experience level. Every interrogated prisoner described American airborne supply abundance that seemed wasteful by German standards. They spoke of training jumps where parachutes were used once and discarded if they touched water or became muddy. They described aircraft being assigned exclusively to paratrooper training rather than combat operations. They recounted seeing warehouses larger than anything in the German army containing parachutes, jump boots, specialized equipment in quantities that appeared unlimited. Medical supplies were available in abundance, including plasma and specialized trauma kits developed specifically for airborne operations. Some accounts seemed so extreme that interrogators initially suspected exaggeration or Allied propaganda. But the consistency across hundreds of independent interrogations made dismissal impossible. Officers and enlisted men, veteran jumpers and new replacements, all told the same stories of overwhelming American material superiority. More significantly, these accounts matched what German forces were experiencing on other fronts. In Normandy, where Allied forces landed in June 1944, the pattern repeated with even greater intensity. Everywhere German forces engaged American paratroopers, they found enemies with seemingly unlimited supplies. These prisoner accounts, while concerning, could theoretically be dismissed as subjective impressions exaggerated by defeated soldiers trying to explain their failure. But then the captured documents began arriving in Caen in greater numbers, and these could not be dismissed. Unlike prisoner accounts, supply documents were clinical, bureaucratic, undeniable. They were not meant to impress or intimidate. They were simply the routine paperwork of American military logistics, the mundane forms that tracked supplies through the military distribution system. and the numbers they contained were apocalyptic for German strategic planning. One particular document proved especially illuminating: a monthly supply report from the American 101st Airborne Division operating in Normandy during June 1944. The report, stamped and signed by multiple logistics officers, listed deliveries and consumption for the month. The division consisted of approximately 11,000 men, comparable in size to a German division, but the comparison ended there. The American division had received 17,500 reserve parachutes during the month, despite losing fewer than 2,000 inches combat operations. Captain Herrmann compared this to parachute allocations for German forces. The entire Fallschirmjäger Corps, consisting of multiple divisions with tens of thousands of men, received fewer replacement parachutes in 6 months than this single American division received in 1 month. The disparity was not marginal. It was a difference of kind rather than degree. The equipment figures in the same report were even more devastating. The American division had received 1,200 tons of specialized airborne equipment during the month. German paratroop divisions received perhaps 200 tons during the same period, and that was considered adequate supply. The Americans were equipping their airborne forces at 6 times the German rate, and crucially, this was sustainable. This was not some special preparation for a major offensive where supplies were concentrated for a brief period. This was normal operating procedure, the routine monthly supply for regular operations. The implications were staggering. American airborne divisions could conduct multiple combat jumps in rapid succession, something German forces could never attempt due to equipment limitations. The vehicle replacement figures told an equally disturbing story. During 1 month of routine operations, not major battles, just normal activity, the American Airborne Division had received 143 jeeps, 57 specialized airborne artillery pieces, and 78 motorcycles as replacements for combat losses and operational damage. These were not additions to unit strength. These were simply replacing losses to maintain authorized equipment levels. The German army had received fewer specialized vehicles for its entire airborne corps in the previous month than this one American division received as routine replacements. The mathematical implications were inescapable. If America could replace losses at this rate for one division, and they had at least 5 airborne divisions deployed or forming, then their total airborne capability exceeded German production by orders of magnitude. Major Steiner approached these documents with the methodical precision that had made him one of Germany's most respected intelligence officers. He was from a family with deep military traditions, but he was also a professional analyst trained to evaluate evidence objectively, regardless of personal preferences. The captured American documents represented hard data that could be quantified, compared, and analyzed. He began calculating systematically. If one American airborne division consumed supplies at this rate, and the United States had deployed multiple such divisions with more being trained and equipped, then the total American airborne capacity was beyond anything Germany could match or even imagine. Steiner requested additional intelligence on American parachute production from all available sources. What came back over the following weeks was compiled from multiple independent channels. Agent reports from Switzerland and Sweden, where German intelligence maintained networks, neutral country trade statistics that could be analyzed for patterns, technical manuals captured with American equipment that listed manufacturer details and serial numbers, analysis of equipment serial numbers that allowed production volume estimates, and open-source intelligence from American newspapers and magazines that published information about factory expansion and production achievements. Each source had limitations and potential for error, but when multiple independent sources confirmed the same basic picture, the conclusions became undeniable. The American nylon parachute production story proved particularly revealing and disturbing. In 1941, Germany produced approximately 5,800 military-grade parachutes. German intelligence had documented this figure and considered it impressive. Germany produced more parachutes than any other nation in Europe. The German assessment seemed reasonable. They were clearly ahead in airborne preparation, just as expected. But by 1942, American parachute production had reached 49,000 units, an 8-fold increase in a single year. German intelligence officers initially suspected these figures were propaganda or included every type of parachute, regardless of military utility. But analysis of captured equipment, prisoner interrogations, and agent reports confirmed the numbers, and 1,943 brought even more shocking data. American parachute production reached 865,000 units, the peak year of American parachute production during the entire war. Germany, by contrast, had produced roughly 12,500 parachutes in 1942 and approximately 16,000 inches, 1,943. These German figures represented significant increases over pre-war production and required enormous efforts. Factory expansion, extended shifts, streamlined production methods. German industry was operating at maximum. Sustainable capacity and production of 16,000 parachutes in a year was considered an impressive achievement. Yet the Americans were producing more than 50 parachutes for every one Germany built, and the gap was widening rather than narrowing. More disturbing still, American production was accelerating while German production struggled under the weight of Allied bombing campaigns and resource shortages. Transport aircraft production statistics proved even more lopsided and alarming. Germany produced approximately 236 Junkers Ju-52 transport aircraft in 1943, according to Luftwaffe records. This figure represented a significant increase from previous years, and German leadership celebrated it as proof of industrial strength and mobilization success. The Luftwaffe was being equipped with modern transports in substantial numbers, but American production in 1943 reached 4,853 C-47 Skytrain aircraft, more than 20 times German output. When German intelligence officers first encountered these figures, they assumed they were propaganda or included training aircraft, gliders, and non-combat types. But analysis proved the figures represented combat-ready transports comparable to German types. In 1943, the disparity widened further. American C-47 production reached 9,208 aircraft, while German Ju-52 production, despite intense efforts to increase output, reached approximately 257 planes. The Americans were building more than 35 transport aircraft for every one Germany produced. The skies belonged to the Allies, not because of pilot skill or aircraft quality, though both mattered, but because American factories could build planes faster than German defenses could shoot them down, and faster than German factories could replace losses. But perhaps the most devastating comparison involved specialized airborne equipment, because it directly addressed what German paratroop strategy depended upon. Germany understood that airborne operations in modern war depended, fundamentally, on specialized equipment, reinforced parachutes, combat harnesses, specialized containers for heavy weapons, medical supplies tailored to jump injuries. The German Fallschirmjäger were elite troops, carefully selected and intensively trained, but their effectiveness depended entirely on properly equipped drops. If Germany could not equip its paratroopers adequately, their training and courage became strategically irrelevant. Germany tracked Allied airborne equipment meticulously. In 1942, Luftwaffe intelligence noted with alarm the introduction of specialized American equipment. Reinforced T-5 parachutes, quick-release harnesses, weapons containers designed for heavier equipment than German models could carry. This seemed like concerning progress, though not yet decisive. The German assessment seemed reasonable. America was clearly improving its airborne capability, but not yet surpassing German expertise. Yet, despite German expectations, Allied airborne equipment, quantity and quality increased throughout 1942. How was this possible? The answer lay in American manufacturing capacity that defied all German understanding of industrial production. The captured documents and intelligence reports included increasing references to specialized American airborne equipment production facilities that were converting from civilian manufacturing virtually overnight. Initially, German intelligence dismissed reports of American production rates as obvious propaganda, too absurd to credit. The claim that American factories were building specialized aerial delivery containers at a rate of 50,000 per month seemed impossible, according to everything German logistics experts understood about military production. Equipment design, testing, tooling, worker training, these processes took years, not months. Claims of production times under 6 weeks for complex equipment violated every known principle of military manufacturing. Yet prisoners of war consistently reported seeing warehouses filled with brand new equipment. Captured documents referenced equipment serial numbers in the hundreds of thousands. Luftwaffe reconnaissance flights of American embarkation ports limited, though they were photographed loading areas with mountains of specialized containers in various stages of preparation. Agent reports from neutral countries confirmed massive American airborne equipment expansion. Major Steiner requested a technical assessment from German Paratrooper Command, asking experts to evaluate whether the reported American production rates were theoretically possible. The response confirmed the impossible. American factories were indeed producing specialized airborne equipment at the reported rates using revolutionary manufacturing methods. Instead of traditional craftsmanship, Americans employed assembly line techniques. Instead of building equipment sequentially from scratch, they prefabricated entire sections in parallel. They employed production methods never before used in military equipment manufacturing, applying lessons from automotive and appliance manufacturing to paratrooper equipment. They built dedicated airborne equipment factories rather than adapting traditional military contractors, optimizing every aspect of the process for speed. They trained tens of thousands of new workers, including large numbers of women, in specialized fabrication techniques. The results were staggering. At peak production, American factories were completing 7,000 paratrooper equipment sets per day. In 1943 alone, the United States produced equipment for 350,000 paratroopers, more than twice the size of the entire German Airborne Corps. Germany could not match this production, even if every factory in the Reich were converted to airborne equipment manufacturing. Individual German paratroopers might be better trained, individual German equipment pieces might be better designed. But the overall mathematics were devastating for German strategy. American mass production meant their airborne divisions could conduct drop after drop, absorbing casualties that would have crippled German formations permanently. The battle for the skies was being lost, not through any failure of German paratrooper tactics or courage, but through simple arithmetic. Germany could not produce enough equipment fast enough to prevent the American industrial avalanche from dropping thousands of men behind their lines. Two specific American innovations illustrated their production capability with crystalline clarity. The first was the development of the cricket signaling device, a small metal clicker that paratroopers used to identify friendly forces in darkness. Simple, cheap, and nearly indestructible, American factories produced 2 million of these devices in 1943 alone, more than the number of bullets Germany manufactured for Fallschirmjäger pistols in the same period. The second was the M1A1 folding stock carbine, specifically designed for paratroopers to wear during jumps. German intelligence officers reviewing reports of this weapon initially assumed it was a limited production specialized item, but multiple sources confirmed the Americans had manufactured over 150,000 of these specialized weapons in 1943 alone, more than the total number of all weapons in the entire German Airborne Corps. These revelations accumulated throughout 1943 like hammer blows against German strategic planning. Each new piece of intelligence confirmed and amplified the picture of overwhelming American airborne superiority. Major Steiner, studying American industrial infrastructure through available sources, technical publications, pre-war industrial surveys, open-source information from American newspapers and trade journals, found explanations for how such production was possible. But the explanations made the strategic situation even more hopeless for Germany. The fundamental asymmetry was overwhelming. Before the war, textile manufacturers, like DuPont, had already developed synthetic fibers stronger than silk. Sporting goods manufacturers, like Switlik Parachute Company, had experience producing recreational parachutes. Chemical companies had perfected mass production of synthetic materials. When war came, these companies simply scaled up existing processes and redirected them to military purposes. American industry was characterized by scale and efficiency, that German industry could not match even when operating at theoretical maximum output. The reasons were structural and systemic, not merely matters of effort or organization. A captured American technical manual for parachute production proved particularly enlightening for German analysts, trying to understand how American production achieved such scale. The manual, intended for factory supervisors, described production processes at the Pioneer Parachute Company in Manchester, Connecticut. The facility employed 3,000 workers producing T-5 parachutes on assembly lines based directly on textile manufacturing principles. Peak monthly production at this single facility reached 28,000 parachutes in March 1943, with sustained monthly production in the 20,000 to 25,000 range. By comparison, the entire German parachute industry in early 1943 spread across multiple facilities, using skilled craftsmen and traditional manufacturing methods, produced approximately 1,300 parachutes per month. A single American factory equaled more than 20 times the output of Germany's entire national parachute production, and this was just one of multiple American parachute production facilities. The manual revealed production methods that German industry had never implemented at such scale. Parachutes moved down assembly lines just like automobiles. Sub-assemblies were produced in parallel. Canopies in one area, harnesses in another, rigging in separate sections, then brought together for final assembly. Workers specialized in specific tasks rather than having craftsmen build entire components. Specialized jigs and fixtures ensured components fit together properly without requiring skilled fitting. Interchangeable parts meant components could be mass-produced and assembled without individual customization. Quality control used statistical sampling rather than individual inspection. The entire process was optimized for volume production at the expense of flexibility, customization, or craftsmanship. German parachute production, by contrast, retained many characteristics of artisanal manufacturing. Skilled workers fitted components together, making adjustments to ensure proper fit. Tolerances were tighter, individual craftsmanship more evident. German parachutes were, in many ways, superior products, stronger seams, more carefully inspected, more reliable. But Germany produced approximately 1 parachute for every 50 the Americans built. The mathematical reality made quality differences strategically irrelevant. A single German paratrooper might be worth 3 American jumpers in combat, but if the Americans could drop 15 for every German, the Fallschirmjäger would still be overwhelmed. The Germans discovered that America had multiple parachute production programs running simultaneously at different facilities, operated by companies with different specializations. The T-5 parachute alone was produced at 7 different facilities operated by textile companies like Pioneer, sporting goods manufacturers like Switlik, and even furniture makers converted to wartime production. These companies had no previous military manufacturing experience but applied their existing manufacturing expertise, mass production techniques from textile plants, quality control from sporting goods makers, material handling from furniture builders to military manufacturing with devastating effectiveness. This distributed production model provided resilience that German centralized production could not match. If one American production facility was bombed or experienced problems, 6 others continued production uninterrupted. Total production barely fluctuated. Germany, with more centralized production, was more vulnerable to disruption. A single successful bombing raid on a critical facility could significantly impact national production. The decentralized American model was not just more productive, but also more resilient, harder to disrupt, and capable of rapid expansion by bringing additional facilities online. Transport aircraft production followed similar patterns of overwhelming American superiority. Germany produced approximately 257 transport aircraft of all types in 1943, representing the maximum output German industry could sustain. This figure included production from German factories and occupied territories, every facility that could be mobilized for transport aircraft production. America produced approximately 9,208 C-47 transports in the same year, nearly 40 times German output, while simultaneously supplying Britain, the Soviet Union, and other allies with thousands more aircraft through Lend-Lease programs. German forces in combat noted that American airborne operations were overwhelming, not because of any technical superiority. German transport aircraft were often superior in design, but simply due to volume. American airborne units conducted operations that consumed more aircraft in hours than German units received in years. This was not tactical excellence or better planning. It was industrial capacity translated directly to battlefield superiority. Specialized equipment production represented perhaps the starkest and most operationally significant comparison between American and German industrial capacity. Modern airborne operations require specialized equipment. Paratroopers need reinforced weapons that can withstand impact. Heavy equipment must be dropped in specialized containers. Medical supplies must be packaged to survive rough landings. In short, military effectiveness in airborne warfare depends fundamentally on specialized equipment, and specialized equipment depends on industrial capacity. The Fallschirmjäger remained partially equipped with standard infantry gear throughout the entire war, with specialized equipment reserved for the most elite units. This was not a romantic attachment to traditional methods or cultural preference. It was simple lack of sufficient manufacturing capacity. Germany produced approximately 12,000 specialized equipment containers in 1943, a figure that had to serve both military and essential civilian parachute drops. The Fallschirmjäger never achieved complete equipment specialization. Many units had to drop with standard infantry weapons that were frequently damaged on landing. Supply containers relied heavily on improvised designs. Only elite formations received fully specialized equipment, and even these often experienced shortages. America produced approximately 380,000 specialized aerial delivery containers in 1943, almost all for military use. American airborne divisions had specialized equipment for every conceivable need: reinforced radios, folding artillery pieces, aerial supply containers with impact-absorbing designs, specialized medical kits. Every American paratrooper had more specialized equipment than a German Fallschirmjäger officer. American supply units operated aerial delivery systems more advanced than those available to entire German airborne regiments. This disparity in equipment capability had direct and measurable battlefield consequences that German commanders observed with increasing alarm. American forces could conduct complex airborne operations at speeds German forces could not match. When American units jumped, they maintained equipment integrity through massive specialized container drops that delivered heavy weapons, ammunition, food, and communications gear continuously. Operation Varsity, established in 1945 as part of the Rhine crossing, illustrated American airborne capacity at scale. The operation deployed 1,696 transport aircraft and 1,348 gliders, dropping 17,122 paratroopers in a single day. Record equipment delivery reached 3,840 tons in 24 hours. This single airborne operation delivered more men and material than the entire German Fallschirmjäger Corps could deploy after 6 months of preparation. German commanders observing this operation through intelligence reports understood they were witnessing something unprecedented in military history. Operation Varsity was not even America's largest airborne operation, it was simply one component of a multi-division assault. Yet this single operation exceeded German airborne capacity by every measurable metric. When German forces attempted similar operations, they faced equipment shortages, aircraft limitations, training constraints, and organizational problems. American operations succeeded despite all these same challenges, simply overwhelming problems through sheer scale. If one aircraft was shot down, another took its place. If one drop zone was compromised, another received reinforcements. The material superiority was so overwhelming that operational challenges became mere inconveniences rather than insurmountable obstacles. The captured documents also revealed American paratrooper training capacity, and this proved particularly devastating to German strategic calculations. Germany had faced chronic training bottlenecks since the start of the war. The nation lacked sufficient training aircraft, jump towers, parachutes dedicated to training rather than combat operations. The Fallschirmjäger training program represented a massive effort, consuming enormous resources to produce elite troops in limited numbers. German airborne operations were perpetually constrained by available trained personnel. Strategic decisions about when and where to drop often depended more on available jumpers than tactical opportunities. American forces, by contrast, operated without any personnel constraints whatsoever. Captured training documents showed American airborne schools graduating 5,000 qualified paratroopers monthly, more than Germany had trained in the previous 2 years combined. They literally had more trained jumpers than they could use. Some training operations involved practice jumps that consumed more parachutes in a day than German forces used in operational drops in a month. The source of this abundance became clear through intelligence analysis. American training facilities in 1943 operated 8 major paratrooper schools, each with dedicated aircraft, equipment, instructors, and support personnel. Tens of thousands of trainees cycled through these facilities monthly. Germany, with its centralized training at places like Stendal, produced perhaps 800 fully qualified paratroopers monthly. The quantity difference was staggering. America trained more paratroopers every month than Germany had deployed in its largest airborne operation of the entire war, the invasion of Crete in 1941. Some captured documents referenced parachutes being used once for training jumps, then discarded rather than repacked, a practice so wasteful that German interrogators initially believed it to be prisoner exaggeration. The waste of equipment for training purposes German forces would consider criminally negligent was routine in American operations. During the Sicily invasion, German planning explicitly depended on American inexperience because the Fallschirmjäger could not match Allied numbers. This dependency on enemy inexperience was itself an admission of German weakness and strategic desperation. Steel and textile production statistics underlined every other production comparison because these materials formed the foundation of airborne warfare. Parachutes, aircraft, containers, weapons all required steel and textiles. Airborne production in an industrial war is fundamentally constrained by material availability. Germany produced approximately 30 million tons of steel in 1943, representing maximum output from German industrial capacity, plus captured European steel production. This figure included output from occupied French, Belgian, and Czech steel mills operating under German direction. It represented total mobilization of every available steel-producing facility. The United States produced 81 million tons of steel in 1943. America produced nearly 3 tons of steel for every 1 ton Germany produced. For synthetic textiles, the comparison was even more lopsided. America produced 542 million pounds of nylon and other synthetic fibers in 1943. Germany produced approximately 27 million pounds of comparable materials. The American advantage was 1 inch the specific materials required for parachute production. Combined Allied production approached 150 million tons of steel versus German output of 30 million tons, a 5-to-1 advantage that translated directly to weapons production and equipment manufacturing. More steel and nylon meant more parachutes, more aircraft, more specialized equipment, more aerial delivery containers, more of everything required for airborne warfare. The production gap was not something that could be overcome through better training, superior tactics, or ideological commitment. It was a fundamental resource constraint that determined maximum possible military production. Germany was fighting a multi-front war with 1/5 the steel production and 1/20 the synthetic textile production of its combined enemies. The mathematics of defeat were written in production figures. Major Steiner and Captain Herrmann spent weeks during late 1943 analyzing these figures with increasing desperation, cross-referencing sources, searching for errors or exaggerations that might make the picture less catastrophic. They found none. Every source confirmed the same basic reality. America possessed industrial capacity that made German production look like cottage industry. The Soviet Union, despite massive losses and German occupation of significant industrial territory, had successfully evacuated and rebuilt industrial capacity that exceeded German output. Britain, though smaller in absolute terms, maintained production sufficient to supply a modern army while also providing advanced technologies that Germany struggled to match. Germany faced three major opponents, each of which had greater industrial capacity than Germany in at least some categories. Combined Allied production advantage was overwhelming across every category of military equipment. The only question was how long German tactical superiority and defensive advantages could delay inevitable defeat. The analysts prepared a comprehensive report for the German High Command in December 1943. The report was clinical, mathematical, undeniable in its logic. It compared German production capacity to Allied output across every significant category of airborne equipment: parachutes, transport aircraft, specialized containers, training capacity, material resources, manpower. Every comparison told the same story. Germany was outproduced in every category by significant margins, and the gap was widening rather than narrowing as the war continued. But the report went beyond simply presenting production numbers. The analysts included detailed projections of what these production figures meant for military operations over the next 12 to 24 months. They calculated that Allied production advantages meant Germany would face increasing airborne threats in every theatre. German forces could continue winning individual battles through superior tactics, better training, and sometimes better equipment. But they would inevitably lose campaigns through attrition. Every paratrooper killed, every transport shot down, every equipment container destroyed would be replaced for the Allies within weeks. German losses took months to replace, if they were replaced at all. The mathematics of attrition warfare inexorably favored the side with industrial capacity to sustain losses indefinitely, and that side was not Germany. The report included projections for 1944 and beyond. If current production trends continued, by mid-1944, Allied airborne forces would achieve numerical superiority ratios of 10 to 1 or greater in most combat categories. By 1945, ratios would likely reach 20 to 1 or higher in many categories. German forces, no matter how well trained or tactically proficient, could not sustain combat against such numerical odds indefinitely. Quality advantages in individual weapon systems became irrelevant when facing 20 times as many enemy weapons. Even if German forces maintained their tactical superiority, even if they won every engagement, the cumulative losses would eventually destroy the Fallschirmjäger through simple attrition. Available manpower was finite. Industrial capacity was constrained. Territory was being lost rather than gained, reducing access to resources. The trajectory pointed inexorably toward defeat. The report concluded with mathematical certainty that Germany could not prevent massive Allied airborne operations through military means given current industrial imbalances. This was not defeatism or political opinion. It was objective analysis based on verified data. The conclusion was professional assessment that should have informed strategic decision-making. The analysts expected the High Command to use this information to develop realistic defensive options. Perhaps Germany could develop new anti-paratrooper tactics while still holding significant territory. Perhaps resources could be reallocated to focus on defensive operations against airborne threats. Perhaps the information could inform decisions about which areas to fortify against parachute assault and which to yield. At minimum, realistic understanding of the situation might prevent wasteful defensive dispersal that consumed irreplaceable resources without achieving strategic objectives. Major Steiner presented this report to his superiors in the High Command with full knowledge of its controversial implications. He was not a defeatist. His professional record demonstrated commitment to German victory. He was not a traitor. His military heritage and personal honor were beyond question. He was a professional intelligence officer presenting accurate analysis so that leadership could make informed decisions. He expected disagreement, perhaps anger at the unwelcome conclusions. What he encountered was something worse, complete rejection of the analysis itself. Hitler refused to accept the report's conclusions, calling them defeatist propaganda undermining German morale. He argued that German willpower, superior tactics, and impending technological advances would overcome numerical disadvantages. He cited historical examples of smaller forces defeating larger ones through skill and determination. Frederick the Great's victories when outnumbered, Hannibal's victories over Rome, Napoleon's early campaigns. He insisted that Allied production figures were exaggerated for propaganda purposes, that American equipment was inferior and would fail in combat, that nylon parachutes would tear under stress, that American paratroopers were poorly trained and would be slaughtered when they landed. Other commanders and Nazi leadership figures reacted similarly. They pointed to continuing German tactical victories, to superior German equipment like the FG-42 paratroop rifle, to the defensive advantages of prepared positions. They argued that German troops were better trained, better led, more ideologically motivated than Allied forces. They believed that tactical excellence could overcome numerical disadvantage. Some argued that secret weapons under development, jet aircraft, improved anti-aircraft systems, new defensive barriers would change the strategic balance. Steiner attempted to explain that tactics became irrelevant against overwhelming material superiority, that quality differences disappeared when facing 20 times as many enemies, that even the best troops could not fight effectively when surrounded by thousands of well-equipped paratroopers. His arguments were dismissed as defeatism. The report was filed and ignored. The German High Command's rejection of these intelligence assessments represented a fundamental failure to understand how modern industrial warfare worked. Military traditions from previous centuries emphasized courage, skill, leadership, tactical brilliance as the decisive factors in warfare. These qualities had won wars for thousands of years. Individual warriors with superior training could defeat larger numbers of inferior opponents. Superior tactics could overcome numerical disadvantages. Brilliant commanders could achieve victory through maneuver and deception. But World War II was different from all previous conflicts. It was the first truly industrial total war, where victory depended more on factory output than battlefield prowess. The nation that could produce more parachutes, transport planes, specialized equipment would win through simple attrition, regardless of tactical considerations. Germany's military leadership, trained in traditional Prussian military methods, could not psychologically accept this new reality. But some German officers did understand. General Kurt Student, creator of Germany's Fallschirmjäger, wrote in a memorandum about studying captured American equipment and supply documents. He concluded that Germany was fighting an enemy with unlimited industrial resources, and that airborne defense based on traditional methods was impossible under these circumstances. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel reached similar conclusions after observing American logistical capabilities in North Africa and Europe. He noted in letters to his wife and in official reports that German tactical superiority meant nothing against enemies who could replace losses immediately, while German units fought with steadily dwindling resources. In 1944, he would be driven to participation in the plot against Hitler, partly from this recognition that the war could not be won militarily. Albert Speer, appointed Reich Minister of Armaments and War Production in February 1942, understood the production gap and worked frantically to increase German output. He achieved significant increases through rationalization of production, better resource allocation, and ruthless exploitation of slave labor. German production increased substantially under his direction. 1943 and 1944 saw peak German output in most categories. But Speer knew his efforts were insufficient. After Allied bombing of synthetic fiber facilities began in May 1944, Speer concluded the war was economically lost. The May 12, 1944 bombing of the IG Farben plant at Leuna was, in Speer's later words, the day the technological war was decided. He would later state, "On that day, it was clear to everyone in German industry that they had lost the war." Yet he continued demanding production increases, making speeches about secret weapons and ultimate victory, because his worldview and position left no alternative. The intelligence analysts continued their work throughout 1944, even as their reports were systematically dismissed or ignored. They documented the Allied airborne operations with the same mathematical precision they had applied to production statistics. The D-Day invasion involved approximately 13,000 paratroopers dropped behind German lines in the early hours of June 6, 1944, followed by thousands more in subsequent months. The logistical planning and execution involved in such an operation exceeded anything Germany had attempted, even at the peak of its power. The specialized equipment deployed to support these airborne operations, equipment containers that could be dropped from 700 feet without damage, folding motorcycles that could be reassembled in minutes, specialized radios that survived rough landings represented engineering and industrial capacity that German forces could not match. Each American airborne division deployed specialized equipment worth more than the entire annual production of Germany's paratrooper program, but built specifically for this invasion and considered expendable. Within weeks of the landing, Allied forces were conducting resupply drops to airborne units at rates that would have sustained the entire Fallschirmjäger Corps. Supply depots established in Normandy contained more parachutes than existed in all of Germany. Aerial reconnaissance showed drop zones, ammunition stockpiles, specialized equipment caches covering square miles. Allied airborne logistics operated at scales that made German supply operations look primitive. American combat units consumed supplies at rates German forces could not imagine sustaining. Artillery dropped by parachute fired support missions measured in thousands of rounds per day. Airborne units were resupplied daily with fresh food, ammunition, replacement equipment. Equipment maintenance was supported by mobile repair facilities carrying enormous inventories of spare parts. Medical care included frontline surgical hospitals equipped with supplies and equipment better than most civilian hospitals in Germany. The intelligence services documented American air operations in Europe with similar precision. By late 1944, American and British air forces were flying thousands of transport sorties weekly, dropping thousands of paratroopers, losing dozens of aircraft to flak and fighters, and replacing those losses immediately. The Troop Carrier Command operating from Britain alone had more transport aircraft than the entire Luftwaffe. A single American airborne division had more deployable men than some German army corps. German aircraft production, despite Speer's desperate efforts, peaked at approximately 39,807 aircraft in 1944 before declining sharply under the combined effects of Allied bombing, fuel shortages, and resource constraints. American production in 1944 reached 96,318 aircraft, including 9,891 transport planes suitable for airborne operations. The Americans were building more than 10 transport aircraft for every one Germany produced, and American aircraft were increasingly sophisticated. C-46 Commandos with twice the capacity of C-47 Seconds, C-54 Skymasters with 4 engines and unprecedented range, gliders that could carry vehicles and artillery pieces. The sky belonged to the Allies by 1944 because American factories could build planes faster than German pilots and flak guns could shoot them down. The Luftwaffe was dying through attrition, losing experienced pilots who could not be replaced, burning fuel that could not be replenished, flying aircraft that were outnumbered by factors of 10 to 1 or higher. German experimental equipment, like the Fliegerfaust anti-aircraft rocket launcher, represented technological innovation, but Germany produced only about 80 of these weapons total. They were outnumbered by thousands of Allied transports and could not change the strategic balance. Quality became irrelevant against overwhelming quantity. The final devastating intelligence came in late 1944 through detailed analysis of Allied airborne operations in the Netherlands. Operation Market Garden, launched in September, saw American and British forces drop more than 34,000 paratroopers and glider troops behind German lines. For a brief period, Allied forces experienced supply difficulties as ground forces failed to link up with airborne units as quickly as planned. This should have created opportunities for German counterattacks against isolated Allied paratroopers with vulnerable supply lines. Instead, the Americans simply flew supplies in. The intelligence reports documented that American forces were receiving supplies by air in quantities that exceeded what German ground forces could transport by truck and rail combined. Hundreds of transport aircraft flying multiple missions daily delivered fuel, ammunition, and food to surrounded airborne divisions. During the period when ground supply was constrained, American transport aircraft delivered thousands of tons of supplies daily, This air supply capability alone exceeded Germany's entire logistics capacity. The analysis was devastating. America had so much transport capacity that they used hundreds of aircraft, expensive, complex, resource-intensive aircraft, to deliver routine supplies, simply because ground routes were contested. Germany could barely supply frontline units by truck and train. America was using hundreds of aircraft for routine logistics. One particular example, documented by intelligence analysts, illustrated the disparity with painful clarity. The 101st Airborne Division, surrounded at Bastogne during the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944, faced ammunition and medical supply shortages as German forces encircled them. The division's acting commander, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, famously replied, "Nuts," when German forces demanded surrender. But what made this defiance possible was not merely courage, it was the knowledge that American industrial capacity would ensure resupply. Emergency air supply operations delivered 1,446 tons of supplies to the surrounded division in 11 days, including hundreds of artillery shells that arrived by parachute literally minutes before they were fired at advancing German forces. German intelligence calculated that the tonnage flown to Bastogne in 1 week exceeded what the entire Fallschirmjäger Corps received in a month, and the Fallschirmjäger in December 1944 had neither full strength nor unlimited supplies. It had a fraction of its former capacity, operating with severe equipment rationing, losing men faster than they could be replaced. By late 1944, the intelligence services were documenting not just American superiority, but the immediate implications of that superiority for Germany's survival. Soviet forces were advancing from the east with massive numerical advantages. Western Allied forces advanced from the west with complete air superiority and overwhelming logistic support. German forces still fought skillfully, still conducted tactical masterpieces, still extracted heavy casualties from attacking forces. But the strategic outcome was never in doubt. The numbers made defeat inevitable. The Ardennes offensive in December 1944, Germany's last major attack in the West, demonstrated the futility of fighting against such industrial superiority. German forces achieved complete surprise through careful security and radio silence. They achieved initial tactical success, driving through American lines, capturing territory, causing panic in Allied rear areas. The offensive advanced significantly in the first days, seeming to validate Hitler's faith in willpower and tactical skill. But the offensive was doomed before it began. Not by any failure of planning or execution, but by simple logistics mathematics. German plans explicitly depended on capturing American fuel and supply depots to sustain the attack. The Wehrmacht could not supply sufficient resources through its own logistics system for an offensive of this scale and duration. Hitler himself stated that German forces would have to live off the enemy during their push westward. Kampfgruppe Paper, the spearhead armored formation, specifically targeted American fuel depots, coming within meters of a major storage facility at Stavelot before American forces set it ablaze. This dependency on capturing enemy supplies was itself admission of German logistical weakness and strategic desperation. No successful military operation should depend on seizing enemy resources to continue. That the German High Command approved such a plan demonstrated how divorced from reality their strategic thinking had become. When American forces recovered from initial surprise and brought their material superiority to bear, the German offensive collapsed within weeks. American units that suffered heavy initial losses were reinforced and resupplied within days. The 101st Airborne Division surrounded at Bastogne was sustained by air supply while American armored forces fought through to relieve them. German forces that initially advanced rapidly found themselves immobilized by fuel shortages, under constant air attack when weather cleared, facing enemy reinforcements arriving faster than German commanders thought possible. The offensive consumed Germany's last operational reserves of fuel, armor, and experienced troops for no strategic gain whatsoever. Intelligence analysis of the Ardennes operation confirmed earlier assessments with brutal clarity. American forces lost heavily in the initial fighting, approximately 19,000 killed, 47,500 wounded, 23,000 captured or missing. but these losses were replaced within weeks. Within a month, American forces were stronger than before the offensive began. German losses were proportionally smaller, approximately 12,000 killed, 38,000 wounded, 30,000 captured or missing but irreplaceable. Germany had no strategic reserves. The experienced troops lost in the Ardennes could not be replaced. The panzers destroyed could not be rebuilt. The fuel consumed was gone. The battle demonstrated in microcosm what intelligence analysts had been documenting for years. German tactical skill and initial success meant nothing against enemies who could absorb losses and continue fighting with undiminished strength, while German strength declined inexorably. Major Wilhelm Steiner did not live to see Germany's final defeat. He was arrested in February 1945 for expressing defeatist sentiments after sharing his analysis with field commanders, preparing to defend against expected Allied airborne operations across the Rhine. The Nazi regime executed him on March 9, 1945 at Plötzensee prison. His death removed one of Germany's most accurate intelligence analysts, a man who had tried repeatedly to provide objective assessment of enemy capabilities to inform strategic decisions. His execution was both personally tragic and professionally symbolic. Nazi Germany literally killed the messenger for bringing unwelcome truths. Captain Herrmann survived the war. In the final months, he organized the preservation of airborne intelligence files, microfilming documents, and hiding them in a salt mine near Berchtesgaden. After German surrender, he contacted American forces and offered his intelligence files and expertise. The Americans, recognizing the value of his knowledge about Soviet airborne capabilities as the Cold War began, employed him in West German intelligence. He would later serve as an advisor for NATO forces, his analytical capabilities recognized even by former enemies. The airborne intelligence files he preserved became valuable assets for the Western Allies. The story of German intelligence analysis during World War II reveals profound truths about modern warfare that remain relevant decades later. Industrial capacity determines victory in total war between modern industrial nations. Courage, skill, tactical brilliance, ideological fervor, all these matter, but they cannot overcome overwhelming material disadvantage. The Germans discovered this truth through careful analysis of captured American airborne supply documents, systematic production statistics, and rigorous mathematical calculation. They presented this truth to their leadership repeatedly throughout 1943 and 1944. Their warnings were ignored because accepting them meant accepting inevitable defeat. The captured American parachute specifications and airborne logistics documents that so shocked German analysts in late 1943 were not secret weapons or classified technologies. They were mundane bureaucratic paperwork, routine accounting of supplies produced and consumed, standard military logistics documentation. Their power lay not in revealing secrets, but in demonstrating reality. America could produce, transport, and deploy paratroopers and airborne equipment at scales Germany could not match. This simple truth, confirmed through careful intelligence analysis, determined the war's outcome more surely than any battle. Logistics is the unglamorous but essential foundation of military power. An airborne force without parachutes cannot jump. An airborne division without transport aircraft cannot deploy. An airborne unit without specialized equipment cannot fight effectively after landing. Superior tactics mean nothing when soldiers lack the material means to execute them. The mathematical impossibility of preventing Allied airborne operations was clear to professional intelligence analysts by late 1943. Every subsequent month confirmed and amplified this conclusion with additional data. American production increased while German production stagnated or declined under Allied bombing. Soviet production recovered and expanded beyond German capacity. British production, though smaller in absolute terms, contributed crucial technologies and significant material. The combined Allied production advantage grew from 1 inch 1,943 to 20 to 1 or greater by 1945. The human cost of ignoring these intelligence assessments was staggering and tragic. Germany fought for approximately 18 months after intelligence services concluded. Victory was impossible. Millions died in fighting that professional analysts knew could not change the ultimate outcome. Cities were destroyed, populations devastated. Europe shattered, all while intelligence reports sat in files documenting the mathematical certainty of defeat. The tragedy was not just that Germany lost. The tragedy was that the loss was predictable, documented, and presented to leadership who refused to accept mathematical reality. The German intelligence analysts who studied American airborne capabilities and production statistics performed their professional duties with competence and integrity. They gathered information from multiple independent sources. They analyzed data carefully and systematically. They presented conclusions based on evidence rather than ideology or wishful thinking. Their work represented what intelligence services should do: provide accurate assessments to enable informed decision-making. That their conclusions were systematically ignored and rejected represents failure not of intelligence, but of leadership, unwilling to accept unpleasant truths. The mathematical proof of German defeat existed in captured supply manifests, showing American airborne divisions receiving more parachutes than German armies. It existed in production statistics, showing American factories building more transport aircraft in months than Germany produced in years. It existed in training data, showing Americans qualifying more paratroopers weekly than Germany graduated monthly. It existed in equipment figures showing American abundance, while German forces rationed every parachute. It existed in steel and nylon production comparisons, showing Allied output exceeding German capacity by 20-1. The proof was comprehensive, verified from multiple sources, mathematically undeniable, and systematically ignored by those with power to act on it. Looking back from the perspective of 8 decades, the German intelligence assessments of 1943 and 1944 appear both prescient and tragically futile. The analysts were correct in every major conclusion. Victory was impossible given the industrial balance. The mathematics of attrition made defeat inevitable. No amount of tactical skill could overcome such fundamental material disadvantage. But this knowledge changed nothing because leadership chose to believe in willpower, ideology, and historical destiny rather than arithmetic. The war continued until Germany's complete military collapse, until cities were ruins, until millions more were dead, until the Third Reich was utterly destroyed, until the evidence of defeat was written not in captured documents, but in occupied territory and unconditional surrender. The lesson from this historical episode transcends World War II and remains relevant for understanding conflict between modern industrial nations. Accurate intelligence is worthless if leadership refuses to accept unwelcome conclusions. Systematic analysis means nothing if decisions are based on ideology rather than evidence. Professional competence becomes irrelevant when confronted with willful blindness. German intelligence provided accurate assessment of enemy capabilities and probable outcomes. German leadership chose fantasy over reality, and the result was catastrophe that might have been limited or mitigated through earlier acceptance of mathematical truth. Wars between industrial powers are fundamentally economic contests won in factories before outcomes are decided on battlefields. This principle was proven definitively in World War II. Germany's intelligence analysts understood this by 1943. They documented it meticulously. They presented it clearly. They warned repeatedly that continued fighting would only increase the magnitude of ultimate defeat without changing the outcome. Their leadership never accepted this truth. The cost of that refusal was measured in millions of lives, destroyed cities, and Germany's total destruction as a nation-state. In March 1945, Allied airborne forces crossed the Rhine River in Operation Varsity, with 17,000 paratroopers dropping in a single day behind German lines. Watching the sky fill with parachutes, a German officer reportedly remarked, "Now I understand what Steiner meant. It is not a battle, it is industrial mathematics." The captured American parachute specifications and production charts represented evidence of a simple but decisive reality. America could produce more, transport more, and deploy more paratroopers than Germany. This advantage was not marginal, it was overwhelming, sufficient to make German defeat inevitable, regardless of battlefield performance. 3-1 advantages in production can be overcome through superior tactics, better equipment, advantageous terrain. 20-1 advantages cannot be overcome except through enemy mistakes so massive as to be unlikely. The Allied advantage exceeded 21-inch airborne categories and was growing larger over time. In the end, German analysts studied captured American parachute documents and understood they could never win, not through any single revelation, but through accumulation of undeniable evidence over months. Each captured document added data points. Each production statistic confirmed patterns. Each prisoner interrogation provided validation. Each agent report corroborated previous intelligence. The picture that emerged was complete, verified, mathematically certain. Germany faced enemies with up to 20 times its airborne capacity, and that gap was widening. No amount of tactical skill or fighting spirit could overcome such fundamental disparity in a war of industrial attrition. The analysts knew this, documented it meticulously, and presented it clearly to leadership. Their tragedy was not analytical failure, but the irrelevance of accurate intelligence when leadership refuses to accept reality. The captured supply documents told a story of inevitable defeat, written in numbers that could not be argued with or dismissed, except through willful blindness. They showed American abundance that seemed impossible according to German experience, but was verified through multiple independent sources. They revealed an enemy with such overwhelming industrial capacity that German hopes of preventing Allied airborne operations were fantasies disconnected from material reality. The only question remaining by late 1943 was how long Germany would deny what the numbers made clear. How many more would die before arithmetic replaced ideology as the basis for strategic decisions? That question was answered on May 8, 1945, when Germany surrendered unconditionally, defeated not primarily by military force, but by the mathematical certainty that industrial capacity determines victory in modern war. The intelligence analysts who first studied those captured airborne supply documents in late 1943 had understood this truth 18 months earlier. They had tried to warn their leadership. They had presented the evidence. They had shown the mathematics. Their warnings were ignored, and millions paid the price for that willful blindness. The captured American parachute specifications documented not just military logistics, but the futility of fighting against overwhelming industrial superiority. The numbers told a truth that German leadership could not accept. In modern industrial warfare, factories matter more than courage, production lines determine outcomes more than tactics, and arithmetic always wins in the end. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.